All right. Afternoon, everybody. It's Matthew Holt. This is THCB Gang. I don't have a fancy PowerPoint telling you who's on today, but we have Jeff Goldsmith, a health futurist from Virginia, Vince Kuraitis, platform expert and general all-round healthcare systems guy from Boise, Idaho. I'm Matthew Holt. I'm up in joining the holidays. I've moved from the Bay Area and up in Lake Tahoe, where it's snowing hard, and I will be hoping to sneak out after this and get a couple of runs in. Somehow I managed to work all day on a powder day, which sounds like a very bad idea. I don't know how that happened to me. But anyway, but here we are. Gents, we are missing, sadly, Casey Quinlan. Sounds like her continuing fun and games with what she calls the Mets party, or the cancer, ain't going so well at the moment. So fingers crossed and love out to Casey. So we're going to miss her elongated, rather fun rants about all kinds of things to do with patient activism. But instead, let's just start off. And Jeff has a great piece on THCB today about how hospitals have been getting bad-mouthed and maltreated and what they should do about it. I know Vince has been was on last week talking quite a bit about the changes to Medicare Advantage and what's going on with the acquisition of Oak Street and all the rest of it. So why don't we kick off with, I mean, I assume you guys want to talk about that, but there are probably other things going on, not the least of which that it was President's Day on Monday and Joe Biden decided to spend it in the Ukraine, which probably indicates something about how we're going to be figuring out the next couple of years regarding foreign policy and all kinds of other stuff that's going to be, also we talk about a lot in the healthcare blog, but does influence our world. So with that, Jeff, why don't you let us know what have you been looking at, and perhaps we can go and dive into a bit to your article.
Well, I mean, before we do, I mean, I thought that was one of the most badass moves by a U.S. president that I've ever seen. I mean, honest to God, to basically be in a war zone, which it is. I mean, it's under missile bombardment, and to basically be striding around in broad daylight in a country that Putin has claimed as his own. That was a pretty amazing move, and the idea that the Chinese might be contemplating supplying weapons to Russia is truly terrifying to me. I mean, I think we really could be in a world war.
Yeah,
and there's a degree of recklessness and a sort of a level of testosterone that I think is really unhealthy in between Xi and Vladimir Putin. And the idea that we could be sanctioning China, we could be applying essentially the same principles that we've applied to people that are trading with Russia. We'd be in a world trade war. And be tempting them to move on Taiwan. So I just, I thought the president deserved a lot of props for showing up in Kyiv when he did. But I can tell you, it makes me really nervous to contemplate the idea that we may be basically at economic war with the two largest nuclear powers in the world.
It is. I mean, it's something to contemplate, right? Obviously, that hangs over everything that's going to happen over the next couple of years. I mean, I think you could argue that two things. One is a pretty bit of a flex to call up the Russians and say, "We're sending our president in. You better not touch us." Don't do anything stupid. Right?
They really would have been. They really would have been reaping the whirlwind if they'd done something to him.
And they have let. They have let several, other Western leaders. So Boris Johnson was there from the UK. Blinken's been there, right? Obviously, and all the regional leaders and Macron and people have shown up. But they, the other thing is that if you think of Biden's domestic policy, obviously, healthcare is connected to this. It's very much been a sort of, I hate to say the words America first, but it really, he's been saying we're going to bring the supply chain back here. We're going to reestablish a unionized middle class with all the stuff that really a big, if you might say, alternative to what's happened over the last 40 years. She would say we'll send the supply chain out to China and globalize and the rest of it. And okay, maybe it's more of a statement that there's actually, an actual activity is yet. But you have seen the CHIPS Act passed, and the energy part of the Inflation Reduction Act talks a lot about buying American, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's interesting to think that we're going to have that, and then we're going to have potentially a confrontational, continued confrontation with China, and perhaps on a military basis, as well as something like more and more continuing that Trump confrontation with them on an economic basis. So, I'm at a point where going that it's a different world to probably the one of us that we always thought of for the last 40 years. And yes, it is bloody terrifying. You have a guy like Putin who has a track record of not caring who he blows up and kills. There doesn't seem to be anybody within the Kremlin yet who can put any sense over him. But the Russians have essentially almost dismantled the sort of 20 to 40 year age group of males. Half of them either left, they want to have left the country, and the rest are showing as cannon fodder. And it's, what's going on in Ukraine is
but it's not. It's really not a fair fight. I mean, no. I don't know if the Russians. You know what the Russians' GDP is? It's $1.7 trillion.
Yeah,
that's it. It's smaller than Spain. It's smaller than Italy. It's a third of the size of California.
But they have
the idea that he's going to take on Europe and the U.S. Yeah. Lots of luck, dude.
But Vince's statement is true. They have nukes, right?
Well, yeah, I do have a healthcare topic, but I do want to jump in on this. I read as a preface. I'm totally on board with you guys in the Western view of Putin's an idiot. I'm Lithuanian by heritage, so Lithuania could be next. And
right.
My wife has volunteered helping a Ukrainian family. However, the lead article in today's Washington Post was really an eye opener for me. And the gist of it is, I'll quote a couple of the statistics from it, that countries that comprise 2/3 of the world's population are either pro-Russian or neutral in this scenario. And they cited India in particular when they said in the last year that India's trade with Russia has increased by 400%.
It's all energy.
And military.
It's all cheap Russian oil.
Well, and military too.
And just to say, connected to that, Vince, is how quickly Europe has switched on to renewables, because the Russian gas pipeline, which either was destroyed by the Russians or from Seymour Hersh by us, has gone away. But I'm with you.
But the punchline here is that what we view as as a world democratic standoff on protecting democracy, that much of the rest of the world views as a European squabble, that the U.S. is two-faced because we've been imperialistic in many other countries, and they're not very sympathetic to any kind of support for you, or they may be not supportive of Russia's invasion, but they really don't care.
Well,
it was just an interesting perspective.
Well, they've got a point. I mean, if I were an Indian national. What your buddies did to them, Matthew, would live on in my gene pool.
My great grandparents' generation.
Your great grandparents, whatever it is. Your great.
I always say to my Indian friends, "Well, there was the road,
but
the railways, the cricket, and there was peace at night, and whatever."
The idea that they haven't connected Russia's invasion of Ukraine to imperialism is kind of amusing to me, because that's exactly what it is. It's just not imperialism against the South, if you will, politically. It's imperialism in their neighborhood. And, we definitely will pay a price for the arrogance of our post-World War II policies. We invaded Iraq, we invaded Vietnam, we invaded Afghanistan.
Right.
So there's chickens come home to roost for all that stuff.
Yep.
But we're not killing innocent civilians by the tens of thousands in a country that's right next door to us. And I didn't want to distract us from the healthcare conversation, but your intro about Biden's visit to Kyiv really I mean,
Yeah,
I
look,
think it's worth reflecting on the fact that we're headed towards a World War I kind of great power confrontation here that makes me really nervous.
and and I think it makes us all very nervous, especially depending how desperate and isolated we make Putin.
Right.
What happens there, and and we don't know about the nuclear. We just don't know about the nuclear weapons they have, and there's that
Right.
weird enclave at Kaliningrad, which is their warm water port. Kaliningrad, the warm water port on the
right next
on
to
the,
right next
to Poland,
Vince's
Germany, and
native land.
yeah.
No, you asked about healthcare. I posted a piece on LinkedIn yesterday morning that deliberately showed, it was called Mass and Scale 101, and it showed the revenues and pre-tax operating profits of the 5 largest health insurers versus the 5 largest hospital systems. And it's gotten 33,000 views so far in a little over 24 hours. I don't know what an impression is on LinkedIn, but I have really been increasingly irritated by the overwhelming focus on the consolidation in the hospital sphere with absolutely no cognizance of the scale of the health insurance, megaliths that are out there contending with these folks. And so far, the health insurers won the policy battle. They have convinced the policy community that consolidation, which is really pretty much the only defense that a lot of hospitals have to deal with these places, is raising costs. It's also reducing their profits and narrowing choices for patients. And they've mopped the floor with the hospitals. Just mop the floor with them.
I would agree with your point about the health plan consolidation, but my view of the issue is it's not so much the nationals, it's really the blues who are dominant in local and state markets. And that the nationals, have 5, 10, 15% market share in any given market, maybe a little bit more here and there.
Well, but Vince, you well know that it's the submarkets that matter, and the nationals dominate Medicaid, managed care, and MA. They dominate it. The nationals are half
that's
of MA.
That's
half
a fair
of MA,
point.
and MA is their most profitable service line. It's a 5% business, and it's important enough a battleground that a lot of attention needs to be paid to consolidation on both sides of this relationship.
And I would add vertical integration, right? We mentioned, and this is going to sort of come around, Bruce, with the changes in Medicare Advantage payments that are coming up, and the issue that they just have with CMS doing a decent, doing its role of auditing back to 2018. It was going to go back to 2011 to talk about risk adjustment and maybe putting out some fines, etc. Now, while that fight's going on, what's happened? Vincent, we talked about this last week on the show with Vincent when Ian and others were on, Ian Morrison and others were on, which is that you now see them buying into, you now see all these the big MA providers buying into the medical groups. Now, I think Jeff, you've been on record as saying they're paying a lot of money for those lives in Oak Street and elsewhere for what aren't
what is it, 16 million a doc?
Yeah,
I mean, God love them. I don't understand. I don't understand the business logic of doing that. But
the only logical explanation I could see for you got Optum / UHG doing this, obviously Aetna's coming in and all the rest of it, is that they believe, and I've called this, they need to get fracking, right? There is a bunch of money that in the 85% of the dollar that has to go by law to the provider organizations, they can be fracked out. And again, that's going to come, what are MA capitated medical groups good at? They're good at stopping people getting to the hospital. Now, George Halverson.
Are they?
Well, that's a question.
Or are they good at selecting people that don't go to the hospital in the first place?
So now, right, that argument. So I was trying to give, I had fun yesterday. I do a little bit of work with a 120 O'Grady, which is a marketing group that works with digital health companies. And they were asking me, can you give us a lecture about value-based care? So I started out with, okay, who can tell me what capitation is and how is Kaiser different to fee-for-service medicine, back to like the 1930s. And, there is this continuing argument about what you just said, Jeff. Are they good at selecting people and lying about their conditions, or adjusting the risk, right? The folks, Chris Chen at ChenMed says the policy should be to try to figure out what happens to people after they join MA.
Good for him.
Not
Well, but that's
they
just distracting. That's just distracting attention from the underlying problem. I am an MA subscriber, so I have an N=1 experience with this program. I'm in it, and I can't get out of it because I got sick shortly after I enrolled. And I am now, risk adjusted out of, I can't afford, well, I could afford if I wanted to not pay my property taxes here in Virginia, supplemental coverage. I'm stuck in MA. I can't go anywhere.
I think you're hitting on the...
I've also, let me finish, Vince. I have a roster of every time I've been called to send a nurse to my house to upcode me. And I got my 16th call in my 8 years last week. I've repeatedly asked them to take me off their call list, and it doesn't seem to have affected it. Signify, they are contracting with my MA carrier to, evaluate me. My wellness visit is overdue. And I know what the wellness visit is about. MA has absolutely added no value to my life.
So you're the poster child of why not to get into an MA plan where you get sick and you can't get supplemental coverage because they're going to rate you based on your individual health status.
And I have only one carrier, Vince. I mean, I don't have a choice.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jeff.
They send me a little premium bill. I have a little booklet. I pay them $38 a month. It is pure profit. Every penny of that $38 drops through to their bottom line. So I am not a fan. I love George Howerson. He is one of the great leaders in our field. I've been waiting for an opportunity to be on a podium with George because I am living with this program. I
need to get him. We'll need to get him on Gang. Actually, I haven't.
I love George Howerson.
How'd you get there in the first place, Jeff?
What do you mean?
I mean, you signed up for an MA plan. I mean, that was a conscious choice. So what?
I signed up because I believe in managed care. And because a huge percentage of my consulting work, Vince and Matthew, as you well know, was trying to get my provider colleagues organized to bear risk across the region. That was what I did in my consulting work. So it was a matter of belief more than anything else. And I had also worked for the company that I enrolled in. I'd worked for them as a consultant. I knew their founders. So, I mean, it was, those were the main reasons why I enrolled. It wasn't an economic decision, but I can tell you it's been really disappointing.
So I just one quick, I saw this on Twitter from Brenda Keeler. The Signify thing of sending a nurse to your house. There's a group in Inovalon. Did I say the name right? Which is the big
Inovalon.
Inovalon's got a sub piece. They're now sending out letters on behalf of Anthem. Sending out letters to MA folks saying, "Hey, we can do this visit by telehealth now."
Great!
So I didn't realize that no one's actually. They probably subbed this out to Wheel or somebody, but they've now got a team. They've now got a team of NPs who are doing telehealth visits, and they'll pay you $100. You can get a $100 Amazon gift certificate, Jeff, for doing it. So they're actually trying to bribe people into the now, which is now George would tell you.
I'm not going to telehealth with them either.
Yeah, George Hamilton would tell you that they can't upcode like that anymore. And then obviously CMS has now radically gone after them for upcoding since 2018 and will be charging fines. But you can still clearly do it within the way that the clinicians, and that's a clinician. If it's an NP on the phone, that's a clinician visit, which can add diagnoses, and obviously this battle is going to continue on and on.
Yeah,
and you're right. No one has a clear answer to how much of that is there good care, or is it all just upcoding? Right.
This is an absolute textbook case of rent seeking in our field.
Right.
It's not as bad as Medicaid managed care because there you have completely outmatched Medicaid bureaucracies dealing with these enormous, very well staffed, wealthy vendors. So it's not as much of a mismatch as Medicaid managed care is. But it's a mismatch.
Can I introduce the topic, Matthew?
Sure.
Okay, so the deal with One Medical being acquired by Amazon closed this week, and I read an article this morning that caught my attention. It was interesting. It was by Bruce Japson in Forbes, and the headline is "One Medical Gives Amazon a First: Relationships with Local Health Systems." And the article goes on to describe partnerships that One Medical has established with some of the premier health systems in the country. Mount Sinai in New York, Mass General in Boston, UCSF in San Francisco, Emory in Atlanta, in Chicago, it's Advocate Healthcare. And as they go on, they talk about how much revenue is coming. There's roughly $1 billion of revenue, and 25% of One Medical's revenue is coming from what they call partnership revenue. I had to go look that up, and I've got their S1 in front of me. I can quote a little bit more of what it is. But I think the question I want to pose is, this is going to be really interesting for Amazon, because I think there's immediately a potential for a culture clash. The way these large platform companies think about the world is, I've got 200 million Amazon Prime members. They're thinking, millions and millions, whereas, healthcare comes from a culture of, it's the patient in front of me. It's one at a time. And so how is this all going to come out in the wash? I think go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead. Let me give a quick comment, then I'll go to Jeff for that, because I have I'm both an Amazon member, and I think my family's Amazon Prime members. So I don't know how that works, because so One Medical, I have to pay $200 a year to join for all 4 of my family members. And Prime is, I think, 150 for just one of us is a member, who will pretend to be my wife. The first thing I saw was that they're going to just reduce the cost for Amazon Prime members to like $130 a year or something. So I'm about to sign up again, so I'm going to have to sign up as an Amazon Prime member.
Not surprising.
The second thing is, I'm going to talk to my buddy who's the chief medical officer of One Medical and see if he can get the Amazon delivery guys to bring the stuff to the top of the 50 steps to my house and not leave it at the bottom. See if he has any pull. No, he's a senior Amazon executive. I doubt he'll get far with that. But I think the third
good exercise for you. I mean, that'll reduce your risk score.
Well, probably increase my risk score, so I'm not walking up and down the steps anymore.
Yeah, no, it'll reduce the risk score.
Who knows? Although I'm not falling down the steps. But probably the more interesting one is that those relationships with I don't know how the money flows, right? There is some payment from the medical groups, the big hospital systems to One Medical for referrals and stuff. But there's still a referral way that One Medical does it. It's still very messy. That also somehow allows One Medical to go to the Blues and others and charge at the same rates as those big systems are doing, and they do manage to get extreme rates out of the Blues. Literally, I think I mentioned before on the gang, I had 2 identical visits for my back, both telehealth visits, and I think the private, which were a day and a half, 2 days apart, and the private, I had one with the UCSF doc and one with the private doc, same kind of doc, exactly the same flow, about the same time. And I think the Blues plan that I'm with paid out $250 for one of the visits, and something in the order of nearly $800 for the other one. And Amazon now, One Medical, now Amazon gets to charge closer to that UCSF rate, and it has done those fees. I don't know how. So there's that. I don't know how.
What's the point you're making, Matthew? I've lost it.
Sorry, the point I'm making is that the connection between Amazon, between One Medical and those systems, is a lot about One Medical being able to charge at those higher hospital rates rather than the private sector rates. So I don't know if there's actually going to be a connection back from Amazon to do other things to the provider groups.
So let me read you from the S1 what it is. Okay, a substantial portion of our partnership revenue is derived from contracts with health network partners, including HMOs. Under these contracts, we closely collaborate with each health network on certain strategic initiatives, such as the expansion of practice sites in a particular jurisdiction or service area, and clinical and digital integration between our primary care and specialty care services. And it goes on. But to me, that sounds fairly substantive. So it sounds like it's One Medical going and saying, hey, there's a need for a primary care clinic out here. Let us do it and let us partner with you. And we'll refer a wink and a nod. We'll refer our patients to you.
Well, it's it makes perfect sense to put their their docs in the unused medical space that these systems own, particularly if they've distributed them in a sensible way across a region.
Mm-hmm.
And to be within hailing distance of their specialists, because one of the really cool things that One Medical does is it has a great referral system for specialty care. But the payments that you allude to, Vince, are payment for referrals.
Well,
it's fee splitting, and it's there's and here's the sad part is that I absolutely love the idea of a subscription-based primary care service. I think that's the way primary care ought to be paid for. And that's where One Medical started, where you didn't have the overburden of billing for each encounter. You didn't have all the overhead. You didn't have all the record-keeping requirements. You didn't have any of that stuff. But there wasn't anywhere near enough revenue being generated by people's subscriptions to float all of that overhead. Right. So they started billing for the encounters. So there goes one of the potential benefits of a subscription model. And that didn't cover the overhead. So they began selling the referrals. So
you're referring to
and they still didn't get to break even with those three revenue sources.
You're making allusions to the old Stark laws and the anti-kickback. CMS about a year and a half ago came out with a whole new set of regulations for what they call value-based enterprises, which really are. If you're familiar with those, if you got some sort of value-based purpose, it becomes much easier to be able to create these kinds of relationships.
It was the equivalent of what used to be called a safe harbor.
Yes, but it's the equivalent.
It is clearly, those systems are clearly paying for inpatient referrals and imaging. And that's what they're doing.
And is your inference that still under the old Stark view of we shouldn't be doing that, or is your view under the more relaxed current mindset of if it's towards a value-based purpose, it's okay?
I think value-based care is a really loose term that is applied to a whole range of arrangements that many of which bear no resemblance to what it is that they're trying to protect. I would delegated risk capitation, dude.
Yep.
So
I would totally
broader. My friend Uwe Reinhardt used to call fee for check the box for tips.
Yeah,
that's value-based care. So to me, what's the incentive? The incentive is to get. I want 100% of their referrals if they're in my office building, and if paying you for those referrals makes it easier for us to work together, well, right on, baby.
So I never got to what I want to do is really frame a broader issue.
Right. Keep going.
Of what can we expect in the future of relationships, competitive, cooperative, or coopetitive, where there's some cooperation and competition between these behemoths that are now entering healthcare, like Amazon and CVS and Walmart and Walgreens, who are all, hiring physicians. What's that relationship going to look like with local health systems? Is it going to work?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know either.
They've got to have some place to go when their patients fall apart.
Yeah.
That's what hospitals are there to do, is to be there when there's nowhere else for people to go. So, honestly, Vince, on the primary care end, a lot of this stuff doesn't belong in the hospital's outpatient department. It doesn't belong in the emergency room. So if some wealthy organization whose core business is failing is willing to, waste $20 or $30 a visit to true up the actual cost of delivering primary care so the hospitals don't have to do it, God love them. Okay. We need all the primary care we can get.
No
frankly
disagreement
don't care
there.
Where it comes from. And I'm very much in the 100 flowers bloom, let them try and create options for us, particularly for us seniors.
Yeah.
We're not going to have anywhere near enough primary care physicians or primary care person power when the baby boom docs retire. We're going to have a crisis here.
Absolutely.
So if these vast conglomerates are willing to throw billions of dollars at trying to stand up systems to fill some of that gap, God love them.
So let's pick on Amazon, because they've got, they bought both sides of this equation, right? Because they actually, when they bought One Medical just bought Iora, and they were just getting Iora. Here's kind of an ironic point. I'd had Rashika Vanopoulos from Iora and Sachin Jain, who was at that point at Anthem working at Camel, which is another one of these capitated medical groups for seniors, which Anthem had bought. And they were arguing about whether they could build their own EMR. And Sachin was saying, yes, we definitely can. We don't need the EMRs from the Epics and the Allscripts, and Athena's not going to work for these groups. We need to, these groups should be building their own. And a bunch of the tech folks on the panel were laughing at them. Anyway, what's just happened is that One Medical has just sunsetted the Iora EHR and put it into the One Medical one, which was basically a fee-for-service EMR, not the sort of not the coaching plus whatever for capitated care management that Iora built. But they do have both sides of this, right? Amazon now has both sides. They have the fee-for-service part.
What's the point of this, Matthew?
Well,
where
you
you
never
going
let me get to my point, Jeff.
Okay, sorry. I mean, I'm just like trying to figure out where we're going with this.
Well, here's where I'm going, right? Is that Amazon has now got a high price, money-losing fee-for-service piece, which does not take capitation, right? Then on the other half of it, they've got a capitated, which is about the same amount of revenue, a capitated, also money-losing medical group, which is integrated directly into Medicare Advantage.
Right.
Are they going to figure out if there is money to be shaken out on either side? How do they shake more money out of the consumers, the wealthy One Medical, member consumers, or can they shake more money out of what's going on with the in general lower income, but obviously much higher revenue per head Medicare Advantage members? Because the only way I see to do that is to reduce. Maybe Jeff says it isn't true, but it's to reduce what you're spending outside of Iora on the hospital side, and somehow increase the amount of money you're getting either from the hospitals for the referrals, or you're getting more. You'll get more money per commercial life out of the employers on the One Medical side, and both of them are hard.
For the life of me, Matthew, I can't figure out why this deal makes sense. It just doesn't. It just doesn't add up. And the idea that you reduce the revenues by making it a perk for Prime members, that isn't going to help. And it seems like what's in common here, and Vince, take me on if you think I'm full of shit, please do. All three of these companies, CVS, Walgreens, Amazon, have something in common. Their core business is failing. So this is a diversification move. It's an effort to find well thought through models in a sector they really don't have all that much influence or knowledge in, and use it as a learning tool and as a conversation starter to try and become essential, to be what Vince is calling a platform in this space.
Yeah, I think you can make that case. You can make the case that pharmacy has become fairly flat. There's not a lot of growth, but I don't see how you make the case that Amazon's core business is failing.
Are you kidding? They lost money in their mail order operation last quarter.
Yeah, that's been their philosophy to reinvest in R&D ever since the company's been founded. Well, you look at the areas they've diversified into.
They had a lengthy period of losing money on their commercial operations, and then they were printing money, and now they're printing less. And they have diversified into like showing they're showing all that. Their core business is now their infrastructure.
So
Amazon Web Services revenue growth is tailing off.
I don't need to really. I guess my take is that their understanding is healthcare is just too big a sector of the economy. It's 20% of the economy.
Right.
It's too big a sector to ignore, and it's just one more move in their diversification.
Well, there you go. But that's the point, is that it's not vertical integration. It's unrelated diversification. And it's an effort to create a presence in a space.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing. You heard me just say there
Okay.
are unmet needs in this space that they can fill with some of their capital.
Yeah.
But whether it makes business sense or not.
Well, I think,
but if you go back to the government, sorry.
Let me go back to the Iora Oak Street model, and I at least have learned to understand the economics of their model. And you can disagree, but I think it's worth understanding. I think the best analysis was written by Kevin O'Leary in the health tech nerds. He wrote a 7,000 word analysis, and what these clinics have to go through is what he calls a J revenue curve. And basically, the first couple of years, you've got excessive costs. You got to recruit staff, you got to train them, you got to get a building. The point he doesn't mention is that a lot of these Medicare patients are going to be sick. And if you remember what tubed the Medicare health support back in 2008 was that these patients that we thought we could take care of telephonically are actually quite sick, and it takes money to get them stabilized. So the profitability comes not in year 1 or 2. You got to look out to year 3, 4, 5. That's the economic model. And your case aside, I think for seniors who haven't been getting proper medical care, that the model that's been developed by Aura and Oak Street and ChenMed of where you can reach out and take on a population, is better for most people, even though it wasn't better for you, Jeff.
Oh no! Look, I wasn't in one of those models. I would have killed to have an Iora or an Oak Street or a ChenMed in Charlottesville.
Okay,
but there's just not enough people to do it.
There's not enough critical mass.
There's just not enough of us seniors to do it. I love those at-risk models. And I love the social HMO.
We're actually
I love
agreeing
the idea that you could get out of Medicare's box and begin paying for things that weren't strictly medical to try and reduce the patient's risk. But on the other hand, Vince, my question has always been, how much excess utilization is there in this space in the first place?
Well,
I think that's been the real question that I've had in my mind, because we're making some assumptions that you can actually do something about a lot of those, by the time they get to 80 or 85 and begin falling apart, that you can do something about a lot of those costs. And I've got real questions about that.
I do as well, but I'll quote you Oak Street's numbers. They say 51% lower admissions because of their program. And
compared to what?
Compared to what average, and that's a good question. I would like to see, a randomized trial.
There you go.
Okay, they don't have that, so I'm not going to defend it. But it's against the Medicare average, and on their behalf, that their patients are probably much sicker than the average Medicare patient. So, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they have some numbers.
There are some numbers, right? And I've raised them before, written about them before. Humana's done a study. Is it Humana or Humana? I can never tell.
Humana.
Humana. That health plan does a lot of Medicare Advantage members. Right? They've done the study. They published the numbers, and they've said time after time that if you look at across the board, they think their book of business comes in about 20% cheaper than Medicare fee for service. You get a ton of argument about that, but that's what they say. But then if you look within their group, the people they're sending out to fee for service versus the people they're sending to the Oak Streets and the ChenMeds, there's almost no difference in the cost between them. So I understand why they're getting into the more and more wanting to expand that at-risk piece, because they want to get a piece of that 85% of the dollar. But I'm with Jeff. I don't know how much savings there are, or whether you need to be the sort of tightly capitated integrated group to get those savings, or whether there's other stuff the health plan can do, and how much of that is just price, right? How much of that is them going and knocking down the health plan, the hospitals on price and pushing them, much down. I don't know.
I can tell you where the cost. I can tell you where the costs are in Medicare, and it is in the dual eligible population,
right?
And the SNP, the MA SNP plans, and these are models that I think ideally apply to the sickest Medicare folks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
what the economics are of taking care of the dual eligibles in these plans is something I know nothing whatever about.
So
But
if you
it seems to me like the highest and best use. And we're talking about people, many of these people are not 65 years old. They're what you can't call handicapped anymore.
right,
Whatever the term is that you use, the people that are in disability and that age into Medicare after 2 years or whatever it is. A lot of the folks are under the age of 65, are hugely at risk, have tremendously complex multifunctional impairment. These are the toughest problems that our health system has to deal with. And they're frankly problems that a lot of hospital folks would be delighted if a care system out in the community, subsidized by a wealthy sugar daddy, not to name names, was willing to subsidize for a while until they got it right. So here too, I think there's tremendous upside for the society and the subscribers to getting this right. I just don't see the business here.
so the bit that, so were George Everson on, he would say, look, in the SNP plans, and he has his examples, he used to write his letters to the Kaiser folks, his be well letters, all about how the Kaiser had eliminated bed sores and iatrogenic bed ulcers and whatever, and that was saving them hospitalization costs. And the same thing is true in the SNP plans, right? Especially around he goes on about foot amputations, how the rates of foot amputations are, I think, eight times greater in the typical fee for service population than in the SNP plans, because the SNP plans go around to the patient's house and figure them out how to dry their feet properly and put on clean socks and all that, really basic stuff, but equivalent to sort of, care in the community. And maybe there is something there. And maybe if you can, reward that for enough people, get enough of those folks into that. But I think you're seeing a ton of growth in that area anyway, right? Because that is a lot of
Matthew, we have 330 million people in the country. You know how many dual eligibles there are?
Actually, I don't.
I think it's like 10.5 million. That's it.
Right.
They generate a tremendous amount of cost.
Yeah.
Whether there's a business in taking care of them or not is the $64 billion question.
And I think, the answer from MA plans is going to be, if you pay us enough for each one, right? Now the question is how much reality versus upcoding there is in that.
Right.
Then we can go and keep the foot amputations and the blindness and the other stuff that is preventable. We can keep it from happening if we can get there. But we'll see what happens after those after the sort of quote unquote cuts to medical lines.
Jeff, you're the hospital guy. I mean, don't you think the hospitals are kind of quaking in their boots about Oak Street's numbers? 51% admissions reduction.
They have 100 they don't want the patients. They're not making money on those patients. No, they're not.
Okay.
They're looking for somebody to try and help them manage the risk and to keep them out of the hospital.
I mean, so that would argue that, if you just keep the there's a different question about whether it makes sense, whether there's a business model for, especially on the provider side, for either Amazon, CBS, whomever, to get deep into this the way they're going. And clearly they think there is, whether it's an experiment, as Jeff says, or whether there's a real business there. But yeah, I mean, that's an argument that says that if Medicare Advantage does that, it'll keep the more unprofitable folks out of the hospital and allow the hospitals to focus down on the quote unquote more profitable, either commercial members or people that do more procedures to, and might reduce volume but increase margin. Is that where you're going with this, Jeff?
I'm like, there's a few hospital systems in the country that have embraced the sickest people in their communities. And I think about Montefiore. I mean, I'm kind of in awe of that place. There's a handful of those places in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
And they really, to ask a hospital, even a hospital with a very sophisticated multi-specialty medical group, to take on the complex managed care challenge of dealing with a significant number of dual eligible people in their communities is just asking something 95% of the hospital systems in the country are not prepared to or able to do. So, I mean, I think that the opportunity for partnerships here is really is very significant. And I think, enlightened CEOs and CMOs are going to look at these folks and go, God, we'd love to work with you because we don't know how to do this ourselves. We don't know how to do it. We can take care of them when they crash. you know, but God, we don't want them in our emergency rooms once a week. It just, we can't do enough for them, for it to be sensible, to be seeing them that often. There really needs to be something out in the community that's robust and multidisciplinary and thoughtfully led, that takes on the core of their risk. Because the hospital, there's a handful of places that are really going to be able to do that effectively themselves.
I think you've articulated that beautifully, Jeff. I just have to comment. I mean, you've done that really well. Well stated.
So I just Googled this, and there are 4.5 million Medicare beneficiaries in special needs plans, and most of them in dual eligibles. I'm looking for the denominator of total. You said 10 million.
I think it's 10. The last time I looked, it was like 10 or 10.5 million.
Yeah. So it's about 50%.
I mean, remember that the number of folks in disability has been growing steadily.
And probably is going to increase dramatically.
Not dramatically, but steadily.
Theoretically, it depends. And you have to ask about long COVID, and there's a bunch of other stuff that may have changed in the last couple of years.
To me, back to Vince's, what you've been working on for the last year and a half. It's the highest and best use of a platform dealing with this population of people.
Well, they've had the worst. They've had the worst care, and 15 years ago, we really did not have a good solution for these people. And
not fair. We did too.
We had pilot programs here and there, but not at scale.
Pilot programs,
not at the scale that IORA and ChenMed and Oak Street are doing it.
Well, you had the social HMO experiment. You had I'm blocking on the name of the one that was in the Asian community in San Francisco that grew. There were 4 or 5.
Unlock, that's what's called.
Yeah, Unlock.
Right.
You've got what is the PACE? Those weren't negligible numbers, Vince. And the fact that our federal government can figure out how to civilize these models and grow them, I think is a policy tragedy, because that's where the real unmet needs were. People have been fiddling with this for 30 years.
Longer. And I think, though, this is a case where the private sector's figured it out. They've taken the models developed in the not-for-profit sector and scaled them.
What they've done is they've tapped into huge pools of thoughtful venture capital.
Right.
For people that, actually want the venture capital to make a difference in people's lives. Whether they have cleared the hurdle of actually becoming businesses or not is the painful question. I'm not sure they have.
Well, then they've at least convinced Wall Street. These became public companies.
That's not so hard.
You might be right, Jeff.
I read somewhere that I forget who it was. They quoted, I don't know if you guys have ever read Edwin Lefebvre's Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, which is about a 1900s era, stock market gambler. And so the problem is the last 5 years, venture capitalists and crypto guys took that as an operating manual, forgetting what happened to the guy who went bad after that. But there's a strong point. Some of the more impressive, if you look at some of the incredibly well-funded but not yet businesses like Devoted Health, the Park Brothers, deep in the core of that, right, there's an at-home medical group for complex geriatric patients, for their 1 or 2, and you got to hope there's a way you could spread that, and that should be able to get to a lot of the people we talked about. Fun enough, to go back to our very first comment here, I'm an advisor to a company which is trying to build the kind of complex box. It's called Ziffy Care. It's got a complex box of being able to look at, being able to show point a camera in a patient's nose and all this, and do a lot of testing with a medical assistant going to the home, and then a doctor and somewhere on telehealth managing these folks. They've got a contract with a charity to do this in the Ukraine for people. There's some Ukrainian folks on their team, and they've actually got a fairly decent revenue stream of doing this in the Ukraine, where of course people are unable to get to regular medical care. But I'm thinking about what some of the people I've been seeing come by me in pitch decks or whatever, who've been raising money in this space, are kind of still doing this off the old wall. So there's a company I've been using for my own back pain called LunaCare, which is a at-home PT company, which is essentially Uber for physical therapists. They get moonlighting physical therapists. they send them to your house. They pay them whatever, half the amount that they get from they get either from the patient or from the patient's insurer. And they're a medical group, but they're doing it on the Uber model of, can they get out to more people, and can they get people to stick with the PT program for longer? But they're basically doing the same old world billing that physical therapists do. Now the question is, can that convert and be really part of a quote unquote value-based care offering? As Joe says, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It looks to me just like another milk the fee for service system, but can you do it where you really could stop people getting back surgery and save downstream costs? You can get PT to people earlier. Jury is out, but that's where I think a lot of the stuff's going to grow.
The thing where I get discouraged, and I actually wrote a piece for, it wasn't in your blog, it was in Health Affairs blog. The tragedy of all these good ideas is that they don't scale. Nothing scales. Kaiser didn't scale. I mean, that's the part that is so hard to wrap your head around. This country is such a mess, and it is so diverse and so weird in its regional variation in how stuff is organized, how it's paid for, how the medical community works, how it behaves. We've just had a terrible problem scaling good ideas up to the point where they can have a societal impact. And that's, that was like that was my thing in the piece I had in your blog about 9 months ago about digital health.
So
is that at some point it's sort of, maybe it's like radiation or gravity or something sets in and the thing just collapses and it doesn't generate enough cash flow to keep going.
So to go full circle here, where I started was the potential culture clash of these large tech and platform companies who only think scale, with the mindset versus the mindset of the provider, which is the patient in front of me. Perhaps there's a positive synthesis there.
Maybe. I can tell you, as somebody that's worked for 2 or 3 of the big investor-owned hospital systems, they live or die by the quality of their regional management. If you have a good regional manager, at some point he tells the corporate office to go pound sand and get out of my hair and let me work my magic. It's the ability to manage that regional variation that makes these companies successful. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the fun part of watching, Advocate Aurora and Atrium try to figure out how to do their thing across multiple states. If you don't have strong regional managers, if you don't have strong regional offices, you're trying to manage it from Minneapolis or from Chicago or whatever, you're lost. They're not going to be able to run it from Seattle, Vince.
Don't disagree.
Well, I think,
I hope that they don't make the mistake of thinking that they can.
Well, there's not a lot of evidence with their experience with Whole Foods that they can.
We'll see. It's always good to have a strong regional manager to blame in case things go wrong, and so that you as the CEO can end up running for the Senate or the governorship in Florida.
I'm just, my mantra to my clients has always been, how far down in the organization can you push the risk? That regional manager is a crucial, it's the person that prevents you from drowning in the national risk.
Right. All right, gents, that's great. We've had a really great discussion about scale, about a little bit about the Ukraine, world politics and elsewhere. And it's nearly time for us to go towards the top of the hour. We didn't talk much about some of the other things that have been going on in this week in healthcare, but that's okay. It was a great discussion. So let me just close by asking you what other things. We didn't get to ChatGPT, although I did this week look at it and ask it how to tune itself to my own writing. Meanwhile, one of Ian Morrison's friends started to tune it to his speeches and trying to figure out whether ChatGPT could like adopt a Scottish accent and try to be funny. We'll see how that works. But there are some interesting proposals there. I know Vince has been playing with that as you have, Jeff. But there's I was offered in one of the tools I use for one of the startups I work with, which is the contracts part of it. I was offered a ChatGPT module that this company is built to like write legal documents. So I think there's a lot going on in that world. But anyway, and I'm sure I've already seen people in healthcare talk about using it for writing, prior authorization letters and that kind of stuff. So we will see how that plays out. But what else? What else are you looking at? Obviously we have the end of the public health emergency coming up. We have more shenanigans in the stock market. Noticed that Teladoc reported slowing growth in their numbers, and they marked their already bad numbers down even further in their forecast. Which, speaking as somebody who stupidly bought them on a dip and forgot to sell, not entirely overjoyed with, but that I thought that. At this stage, it doesn't make much difference to my bigger portfolio position.
Matthew, if we're so smart, why ain't we rich?
Jeff,
Right?
Jeff's saying this from this lovely view of his ranch behind him. I'm saying this from my view.
I don't live in California, dude. I was,
right?
if I lived in California, I wouldn't have a retirement plan. It would all have gone to taxes.
You talk about this, you folks.
Exactly.
Anyway, quick wrap. Give me Vince, then Jeff. Give me your sort of what you're looking at for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll close from there.
My comment will be very quick. We're almost, just again, full circle, almost upon the 1 year anniversary of Russia attacking Ukraine. That's my Western point of view. Say our prayers that they don't have a terrible offensive, and I hope that war is over as quickly as possible.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm actually thinking about writing a book. What a foolish thing for someone of my vintage to do, but
that's where you need ChatGPT.
No, thank you. It's called The Haunting, and it's about how ideas that are poached from marginalist economic theory make a home in healthcare, and they don't work, and then they don't go away. And the secret to why they seem to be immortal, and the ACO is a classic example, is because they become franchises. So I'm working up a book proposal on The Haunting, why bad ideas seem to haunt healthcare and never go away. So that's going to be my project for the summer and fall.
I was just thinking about that because I gave this talk on value-based care yesterday, and there's the folks at Trillium Healthcare done a lovely chart which had 20 years of 20 Medicare models, MIPS, hospital readmission, Pioneer ACOs, what's it called, ACO Reach, all the other ones you've forgotten about, the one for cancer care and the one for PCAS bundle payments, and just if you can remember the names of all the different programs, let alone understand what was going on inside them, just in the fee-for-service part of Medicare, let alone all the stuff that's been happening in commercial world or MMA or whatever, the complexity of that has just been overwhelming, which is why, every sensible country in the world just has a flat fee schedule and sits on those fees so that, when I break my rib in France, I go to the emergency room, they x-ray me and they kick me out the door, with a €100 bill. Whereas my friend up here who just fell off his snowboard and ripped his leg open. Tremendous advert for his suit. It didn't rip his suit, but then after he got home, he noticed there was a lot of warm sensations falling down his leg. Took his suit off and found that he had
full of blood.
13 stitches worth of massive scar. Comes back from the emergency room with a $1,700 bill, for like a clean up and a stitching. And
that was cheap.
17,000 in some places.
Yeah, my kid got a $6,000 bill for 4 stitches under his chin, but that's Marin County, Marin County premium for you.
If we've got an affliction, Matthew, it's that we can't do simple in this country to save our lives.
We cannot. That is the problem. All right. Well, with that, I will wrap here. You've been listening to THCB Gang. This was the 23rd of February edition. Last Thursday in February. We're back next week on the 2nd of March with a different crew. I believe Robbie Pearl, the late of Permanente Medical Group, will be here to tell us about why everything we've said before on THCB Gang about capitated medical groups was wrong. So we'll see who has to defend the gang against that. So looking forward to that episode. I want to thank Jeff Goldsmith from the It's a beautiful, beautiful ranch of Charlottesville, Virginia. Vince Kuraitis from the wild mountains of Idaho and his bunker up there for their time. And you've been listening to Matthew Holt, leader of THCB Gang. Please visit us either live next time at 1 p.m. You can watch this video anytime, but just find it on the blog, link to it, Twitter and LinkedIn. And of course, this is a podcast on Spotify or Apple. You can go and download it and see what else. There are a few other things that you'll see, interviews, etc., on THCB Gang that come in the same podcast stream. So I hope to see you there. Look forward to seeing you all soon. And thanks, James, for your time this afternoon.